Do all battles end when the guns fall silent? Or do they continue to echo in burning memories, in the darkness of the soul, and in nightmares that never let go? What happens to a soldier who survived only because of the loyalty of his dog, but is sentenced to death for a crime he did not commit? This is not just a story about an execution. It is the journey of Jonas Carter and his German shepherd, Thor, where faith, loyalty, and everlasting love become the strongest weapons against the darkness. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country below. Let's see how far one act of kindness can go. The desert dawn stretched across Iraq with a pale orange glow, its light diffused by a haze of dust that clung to the air like a suffocating veil. Though the sun had only begun to rise, the heat already pressed down with relentless weight. The silence was deceptive, broken only by the low growl of engines and the crunch of tires rolling over uneven sand. Jonas Carter sat in the rear of a Humvee, adjusting the strap of his vest. He was 38, tall and lean, the kind of man built more from stamina than brute strength. His dark brown hair, cut short to military regulation, was streaked prematurely with gray at the temples. His face was angular, shadowed with lines carved from years of deployments, and his gray-blue eyes carried the haunted stillness of someone who had seen too much. Jonas had always been a quiet man, one who preferred action over words. War had sharpened that silence into something heavier. He was respected among his brothers not because he was the loudest or most decorated, but because he was steady, measured, and unflinching when chaos reigned. Yet beneath that hardened shell lay memories that never let go. Friends lost, nights broken by mortar fire, and faces that returned each time he closed his eyes. Beside him, resting with perfect composure, was Thor, the German shepherd K9. At 9 years old, Thor was still a force of nature. His coat gleamed black and tan, his amber eyes sharp and watchful, and a faint scar ran across his right shoulder, the relic of a mission where he had thrown himself into fire to drag a wounded Marine to safety. Thor sat alert, every breath and twitch of his ear tuned to Jonas's movements. To the untrained eye, he was just a dog, but Jonas knew better. Thor was his lifeline, his anchor, the only thing that kept the shadows at bay. At the front of the convoy, Sergeant Daniel Briggs scanned the road with the sharp gaze of a man who had survived too many deployments. Briggs was in his early 40s, square-jawed, broad-shouldered, with a beard peppered with gray. Years ago, a roadside bomb had claimed his best friend in Afghanistan, a wound that hardened him but never truly healed. That loss lived in the tightness of his jaw, in the furrows across his brow. Still, Briggs commanded respect. He was steady, calm under fire, and carried the weight of his men as though it were his own. In the passenger seat sat Corporal James Ellery, only 26, with wiry arms and a restless energy that seemed too big for his body. His brown hair stuck out beneath his helmet, his pale blue eyes darting with both eagerness and unease. James had a grin that could cut through even the darkest of nights, a boyish charm that made him beloved among the unit. He cracked jokes when fear lingered, though Jonas often saw the truth hidden in his eyes. Fear was always there, gnawing, waiting. The convoy pressed forward, the desert road stretching endlessly ahead. Jonas shifted in his seat. Something in the silence gnawed at him. War had taught him to listen with more than ears, with instinct, with bone-deep intuition. And right now, every part of him whispered danger. Thor's ears pricked forward, his nose twitched, body tensing, as if he too sensed what Jonas felt. Jonas leaned forward. "Briggs," he said quietly, "something's not right." The sergeant glanced back, eyes narrowing. He trusted Jonas. He trusted Thor. But missions did not stop for gut feelings. "Eyes open," Briggs muttered, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of years. "Stay sharp." The world shattered. A blinding flash ripped through the morning, followed by a roar that split the air. The ground convulsed as a buried bomb erupted beneath the lead vehicle. The Humvee lifted violently, sand and fire exploding upward. Jonas was hurled sideways, ears ringing with a deafening scream of sound. Metal twisted, men shouted, then silence, swallowed by flame. Jonas hit the ground hard, sand and blood filling his mouth. His chest heaved, lungs burning. His leg throbbed where shrapnel tore skin. He coughed, vision blurred as chaos roared around him. Thor was already moving. The German shepherd lunged toward Jonas, jaws gripping the strap of his vest. With raw, unyielding strength, Thor dragged him across the ground, away from the inferno consuming the convoy. Jonas clawed at the sand, coughing, his voice cracking as he tried to push forward, back toward the wreckage. "No!" he gasped, throat torn raw. "My men!" Thor barked furiously, planting himself in Jonas's path, eyes blazing with command. He would not let Jonas die here. Through the smoke, Jonas glimpsed Daniel Briggs crushed beneath twisted metal, his broad chest pinned, his face turned still. James Ellery's helmet rolled across the sand, his pale eyes vacant, his boyish grin gone forever. Around them, fire devoured the rest of the unit. Jonas's chest broke with a soundless cry. He clawed forward, grief a weight heavier than the sand, but Thor forced him back, dragging him toward a shallow ditch. Bullets cracked from rooftops, enemy fire raining down, but Jonas barely registered it. His world had narrowed to Thor's fur pressed against his cheek, the dog's heartbeat thundering like a war drum. By the time reinforcements arrived, the ambush had done its work. The desert lay strewn with wreckage, smoke rising like black pillars into the unforgiving sky. Jonas was found alive, bleeding but breathing, his body trembling not from wounds, but from the enormity of loss. Thor stayed pressed against him, amber eyes fierce, daring anyone to come too close. In the days that followed, Jonas moved like a shadow. His body healed, but his mind remained in the ditch, in the fire, among the faces of the fallen. Each night he saw Briggs's crushed form, James's lifeless stare, the laughter of brothers now swallowed by flame. He survived, but survival felt like betrayal. Thor remained his tether to the living. When nightmares dragged him into darkness, Thor nudged him awake. When panic stole his breath, Thor pressed close, a living weight to remind him he was still here. Jonas clung to the dog's fur until his knuckles whitened, whispering apologies to ghosts who never answered. The scar on his arm from shrapnel healed. The scar within him only deepened. He told himself he should have done more, should have died with them. But he had not. He lived because Thor had dragged him out when he had chosen to stay. He lived, and the memories never let him go. The years after Iraq unfolded with a quiet unease that Jonas Carter could never shake. His honorable discharge had come with the weight of medals and formal handshakes. Yet beneath the ceremony lay something heavier, the silence of empty bunks, the hollow laughter of memories that refused to fade. The military, recognizing the extraordinary bond between him and Thor, had granted special permission for the German shepherd to retire alongside him. It was rare, but those who had witnessed Thor's relentless loyalty knew the two could not be parted without breaking them both. Jonas settled in a modest house on the outskirts of Oceanside, California, where the Pacific wind carried salt and the cries of gulls across rooftops. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a faded porch with peeling white paint, and a narrow yard enclosed by a leaning wooden fence. It was not much, but after years of tents and barracks, it felt almost foreign in its stillness. Thor adjusted faster than Jonas. The dog patrolled the fence line daily, nose high, chest proud, as though guarding this little patch of earth with the same seriousness he had guarded soldiers in combat. Nights, however, were harder. Jonas often woke drenched in sweat, breath shallow, eyes wide as if still staring into smoke-filled alleys and burning wreckage. The thunder of explosions lived on inside him. More than once, he had jolted awake screaming Daniel Briggs's name, or reaching desperately for James Ellery's lifeless form. Each time, Thor was there. The German shepherd would leap onto the bed, pressing his solid weight against Jonas's chest, nudging his hand with a wet nose until the trembling slowed. Amber eyes met gray-blue ones, and without words, Thor reminded him, "You are not alone." During the day, Jonas attempted normalcy. He worked part-time at a hardware store run by Harold Simmons, a grizzled man in his late 60s with thinning white hair and a belly that spoke of too many years behind a counter. Harold had once been a Navy machinist in Vietnam, and the shared shadow of war created an unspoken camaraderie between him and Jonas. Harold never pried, but his weathered hands sometimes lingered on a box of nails or a hammer as he told short, sharp stories of jungles, of men who never came home. "The past doesn't leave, son," Harold muttered once, his voice rough like gravel. "It just changes its uniform." Jonas had simply nodded, understanding more than he wished to. Thor was a fixture at the store too, lying obediently near the entrance, greeting customers with alert ears and calm watchfulness. Children pointed, sometimes asking to pet him, and Thor would accept with regal patience. Elderly women smiled, remarking that he looked like a guardian angel in fur. For Jonas, the dog's presence was more than comfort. It was a shield against the creeping panic that threatened to overwhelm him in crowds. One evening, Jonas encountered Maya Lopez again. She had been his fiancée, once before war fractured their lives. Maya was 34 now, her long black hair tied back in a loose braid, her skin sun-kissed from years of service as a military nurse. Her dark eyes carried warmth, but also steel, the look of a woman who had seen blood, loss, and yet refused to surrender to despair. When she stepped out of her small sedan in the hardware store's parking lot, Jonas felt time collapse. "Jonas," she said softly, her voice carrying both surprise and sorrow. "Maya," he replied, his tone restrained, his posture stiff. Thor's ears perked, tail wagging slightly as he recognized her. She had been there in Iraq, tending to the wounded, whispering encouragement in makeshift triage tents. She had scratched behind Thor's ears after every mission, calling him her silent hero. They spoke awkwardly at first. She had returned to Oceanside recently, working at the local clinic. She noticed the shadows beneath Jonas's eyes, the tautness in his jaw, and though she did not speak of it, she understood PTSD when she saw it. In her work, she treated veterans scarred by war's invisible wounds. Jonas was no different, only quieter, more locked inside himself. Weeks passed into months, and Jonas began to believe life might, if not heal, at least soften. He still woke with nightmares, still felt guilt clawing at him, but Thor remained steadfast. Maya's presence warmed the edges of his solitude, and Harold offered the silent understanding of one broken soldier to another. But fate seldom allowed peace to linger. Victor Montgomery was a name known in Oceanside's upper circles, a real estate developer with a reputation for ruthless deals and ostentatious wealth. He was in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with slick black hair combed immaculately back and a wardrobe that screamed power, tailored suits, polished shoes, cufflinks gleaming like small suns. His square jaw and commanding presence intimidated associates, and his piercing brown eyes missed nothing. He had built his empire through relentless ambition, but ambition often leaves enemies in its wake. Rumors swirled of bribes, threats, even whispered connections to organized crime. Jonas had once been hired as private security for Montgomery at a corporate gala. He remembered the man's arrogance, the way his laughter cut sharp, the way he looked at people as though they were assets to be bought or obstacles to be crushed. Jonas disliked him instantly, though he kept his opinions silent as professionalism demanded. Still, he had noticed the disdain in Montgomery's eyes when he glanced at Thor. An animal, to him, was just another possession, not a comrade. It was months later when Jonas heard the news. Montgomery had been found murdered in his penthouse overlooking the Pacific. The details were grim: stab wounds, a struggle, blood-staining white marble floors. The city buzzed with whispers, speculation, and shock. The police investigation was swift, perhaps too swift. Detective Raymond Keller, a man in his mid-40s with thinning blonde hair and a square, unshaven jaw, was known for his brusque demeanor and impatience with anyone he considered beneath him. Years on the force had made him sharp, but also cynical, convinced that quick arrests meant justice served. When evidence, a partial fingerprint on the weapon, traces of Montgomery's blood on a jacket allegedly belonging to Jonas, and financial records showing a suspicious deposit, pointed toward Carter, Keller believed he had his man. Jonas was arrested on a quiet afternoon, Thor barking furiously as uniformed officers led his master away. Maya stood frozen on the porch of her small house, her dark eyes wide with disbelief, as Jonas, in handcuffs, kept his head lowered, refusing to resist, but unable to hide the confusion and betrayal etched into his face. The trial moved with brutal speed. Prosecutors painted Jonas as a bitter veteran struggling with PTSD, quick to anger, and desperate for money. They painted Thor not as a hero, but as a distraction, a tool to mask Jonas's instability. Maya testified to his struggles, but her words were twisted, used to emphasize his fragility rather than his humanity. Jonas remained stoic, silent, his lean frame in the defendant's chair radiating quiet dignity, even as the walls closed in. His mind replayed Iraq over and over, the ambush, the fire, Briggs's crushed body, James's lifeless eyes, and now the courtroom felt like another battlefield. But this time, he had no rifle, no squad, no command, only Thor's distant barks echoing in his memory. When the gavel fell, the verdict was clear: guilty. The sentence was harsher still: death by lethal injection. In the aftermath, Thor was taken into custody, but not abandoned. The court, acknowledging his history as a military service dog, released him into the care of Maya Lopez. When she opened her door, Thor trotted inside, amber eyes searching for Jonas, tail lowering when he realized his master was gone. Maya sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around him, her tears dampening his fur. "You're with me now," she whispered, voice breaking, "but we'll fight for him. Somehow, we will." And so, in the quiet house of a nurse and the shadowed heart of a condemned soldier, the next battle began. Ravenhill Correctional Facility stood at the edge of the city like a fortress forgotten by time, its gray concrete walls scarred by decades of weather, its barbed fences humming faintly in the dry wind. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of bleach and rust, echoing faintly with the clang of distant doors. Jonas Carter had been here for months, each day bleeding into the next, but now the countdown was real, less than a week until the execution chamber. The thought pressed down harder than the walls around him. Jonas sat on the narrow cot in his cell, his frame hunched forward, his fingers knotting together. His face, lean and sharp, bore the hollow look of a man who had lost more than freedom. The haunted gray-blue eyes that had once scanned horizons for threats now stared endlessly at the floor. The scar on his arm from shrapnel felt like it burned when memories returned. His body was alive, but inside, part of him was already walking toward the grave. The heavy door opened with a metallic groan, and a figure stepped inside the dim corridor. Helena Graves, the warden, carried herself with the authority of years. At 50, she was tall, with a frame both sturdy and feminine, her short hair streaked silver against dark roots. Her face was lined but dignified, her brown eyes keen, yet softened by sorrow, she kept hidden beneath discipline. Helena had served in the military police before she transitioned to corrections. She had seen men broken, men dangerous, and men unjustly caught in the system. But the loss that shaped her most deeply had been personal. Her husband, a Marine, had been killed in Beirut during a bombing decades earlier. That grief had carved itself into her, and though she seldom spoke of it, it was there in the way she measured every decision, with gravity and with memory. Jonas rose slowly as she approached, his shoulders squared more from habit than hope. He swallowed, his throat dry, and when he spoke, his voice was low and rasped like gravel dragged across stone. "Warden," he said, his eyes flickering up to meet hers. "I know the rules are strict, I know time is short, but please, I have one request." Helena's brows drew together, though her face remained unreadable. "Final requests go through the official process. Say it, Carter, and I'll consider if it's even possible." Jonas's hands trembled. He clenched them into fists against his thighs. "Thor," he whispered, "my dog. He saved my life once, on the battlefield. He's the reason I'm even standing here, breathing. I just need to see him. One last time. To tell him goodbye." For a long moment, the air felt heavier than the walls themselves. Helena studied him closely. She had seen inmates plead for steak dinners, cigarettes, or the company of women. She had heard anger, denial, desperation. But Jonas's eyes carried something else, a raw truth, the look of a man haunted by war, clinging to the one bond left unbroken. Memories flickered in her, the folded flag handed to her at her husband's funeral, the loneliness of raising a daughter alone, the hollow ache that time never filled. She remembered the dog her husband had adored, a stocky brown mutt that used to curl at their feet during quiet evenings. After his death, that dog refused to eat for weeks, pacing the door as if waiting for its master to return. It had taught her, painfully, how deep loyalty between man and animal could go. She let out a slow breath, her lips tightening. "You realize this is highly unusual," she said. "No one brings animals into death row. It isn't procedure." Jonas's voice cracked, though he tried to hold it steady. "I'm not asking for mercy. I just don't want to leave without telling him goodbye. He doesn't know why I'm gone. He'll keep waiting at the door, thinking I'll come back. Please, let me give him peace. He deserves that much." Helena's expression shifted. The professionalism held, but a flicker of compassion glowed in her eyes. She turned slightly as another guard stepped into view. Officer Richard Cole, in his early 30s, tall and broad, with sandy hair and a neatly trimmed beard, looked at her with raised brows. Cole had a reputation as fair-minded among the staff. He had grown up the son of a steelworker who drank too much, and the hardship gave him a protective instinct toward those dealt rough hands. He studied Jonas, then the warden, sensing the weight of the moment. Helena's silence stretched before she finally nodded once, decisively. "I'll contact Ms. Lopez. She has custody of the dog. If she agrees and we can arrange transport, I'll allow it. But understand, this doesn't happen for anyone else. Consider it a rare act of trust." Jonas blinked hard, his jaw tightening as emotion threatened to break through. He drew in a breath that shuddered in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice raw. "You don't know what this means." Helena stepped back, her features regaining their firmness. "Don't make me regret it, Carter. I'll arrange it quietly. You'll have only minutes. Make them count." She turned sharply, her boots clicking against the cold floor as she walked away. Cole lingered a moment, meeting Jonas's gaze. The younger man's eyes were steady, almost sympathetic. "Hold on, soldier," he said softly before following the warden. Jonas sat back down on his cot, his chest tight. For the first time since the gavel had struck down his sentence, a spark flickered inside him. It was not hope for himself. His fate was sealed, but for Thor. For the chance to look into those amber eyes again and let the dog know he had not been abandoned. That bond, stronger than walls, stronger than time, was the last piece of himself he had left. In the stillness of the cell, Jonas closed his eyes. He remembered Thor's bark during the ambush, the weight of the dog's body dragging him to safety, the warmth pressed against him when nightmares clawed at his chest. He whispered into the silence, "Hold on, buddy. Just a little longer." The day Thor was brought into Ravenhill was gray and damp, the sky sagging with low clouds that pressed on the barbed wire fences like a suffocating blanket. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving puddles along the cracked concrete yard and the faint scent of rust in the air. Inside the prison, fluorescent lights hummed with a sterile glow, echoing off the endless corridors. It was here, in the cold confines of death row, that a reunion waited to unfold. Jonas Carter stood inside a small visitation room, his wrists free for once, though the faint marks of restraints remained on his skin. His lean frame trembled with tension, his eyes darting toward the door like a man afraid to believe his hope was real. He had dreamt of this moment for nights on end, his mind weaving Thor's familiar bark into the dark silence of his cell. Now, the thought that it might truly happen filled his chest with a painful tightness. The door opened, and Thor bounded in. The German shepherd's black and tan coat gleamed despite the rain, his muscular form moving with an urgency born of instinct. At 9 years old, Thor carried a battle-worn dignity. But in that instant, he looked like a puppy again, tail whipping with joy as he lunged toward Jonas. The soldier dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the dog's powerful neck. For a moment, prison walls dissolved, the death sentence faded, and all that remained was the heartbeat of loyalty against his chest. Tears burned Jonas's eyes as Thor pressed his head into him, whining softly, as if scolding him for vanishing. Jonas buried his face in the thick fur, whispering, "I'm here, buddy. I'm still here." Watching from a distance was Maya Lopez. She had been the one to bring Thor, her long black hair tied back neatly, her nurse's jacket traded for a simple dark coat. She stood tall, but her eyes shimmered with unspoken grief as she watched man and dog reunite. Maya's heart twisted at the sight. She had known Jonas as a soldier, a fiancé, a man who hid his pain behind silence. Now she saw him as a condemned prisoner, clutching the only soul that had never abandoned him. The moment of joy shifted abruptly. Thor stiffened, his ears pricking, nose twitching. He pulled away from Jonas and began pacing the room, nostrils flaring as if chasing a scent unseen by human senses. He stopped near a corner where a sealed evidence bag rested on a table, one that had been brought to the prison as part of an official review. The bag contained items collected from Jonas's case: clothing, photographs, scraps of Montgomery's bloodied penthouse. Thor growled low, amber eyes sharp, then began pawing furiously at the bottom seam of the bag. His claws scraped against the plastic, his bark ringing out with urgency. Maya stepped forward quickly, alarm written on her face. "Jonas, what's he doing?" Jonas frowned, rising to his feet, his heart pounding. "He's found something." The prison guard in the room, Officer Richard Cole, moved toward the dog, his tall, broad frame tense, but Jonas lifted a hand. "No, let him work. He's trained for this. If he's reacting, there's a reason." Cole hesitated, then stepped back, his sandy beard twitching with uncertainty. At that moment, another figure entered the room. Detective Marcus Hale, a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and rectangular glasses, had come at the warden's request. Marcus's angular face carried the lines of decades in law enforcement. Once confident in the case he had built against Jonas, he now lived with a gnawing unease that grew each time he revisited the evidence. Hale was a man who prided himself on precision, yet his conscience had begun whispering that something critical had been overlooked. He stopped in his tracks when he saw Thor tearing at the bag. "What the hell is going on?" his gravelly voice demanded, though there was no real anger in it, only tension. Maya knelt by Thor, her slender fingers undoing the seals with trembling urgency. The bag opened, and from the lining, a small bundle of cloth slipped free, its edges torn, dark stains dried into the fibers. She lifted it gingerly, her nurse's eyes instantly recognizing what the stains were: blood. But not documented, not in any report. Marcus's breath caught. He adjusted his glasses, his weathered hand reaching out. That piece wasn't listed in the chain of custody. He turned sharply toward the guard. "Who handled this bag?" Cole shook his head firmly. "It came from storage, sealed like that. I didn't touch it until today." Jonas's jaw tightened. His mind raced back to the trial, to the way the prosecutors had spoken so confidently, as if every thread of evidence was neat and perfect. His voice was steady, though his chest burned. "You said everything matched me, my jacket, my fingerprints. So what the hell is that?" Marcus studied the cloth. The stains were darker, older, and he noticed tiny fibers caught along the edges, fibers inconsistent with the fabric of Jonas's jacket. His stomach sank. This wasn't Jonas's. It belonged to someone else. Thor barked again, pawing insistently at the fabric as if to say, "Here! This is the truth you missed." Maya's dark eyes turned toward Hale, fierce and demanding. "You see it, don't you? This was hidden. Someone planted evidence and left this out. Jonas wasn't lying." Marcus stood frozen, his mind battling years of instinct. To admit error was to unravel his reputation, his career. But the dog's behavior, the blood-stained cloth, it was undeniable. He thought of his father, a beat cop who had drilled into him that the job was about truth, not ego. His conscience screamed louder than his pride. He looked at Jonas, whose haunted eyes bore into him. Jonas did not plead. He did not beg. He simply waited, silent and steady, as if daring the detective to choose between justice and convenience. Marcus's voice was low when he spoke. "Something's wrong. I don't know how this slipped past, but it did. And if this cloth doesn't match your jacket, then someone tampered with the evidence." Jonas exhaled shakily, gripping Thor's fur for strength. For the first time in months, there was a flicker of hope. Not for freedom, not yet, but for truth. Thor pressed against his side, tail low but steady, his eyes burning with the same resolve Jonas had once carried into battle. The German shepherd had saved his life once in Iraq. Now he had done it again, tearing open the seams of a lie. And Marcus Hale, once the architect of Jonas's downfall, now stood shaken, realizing that perhaps the man he had condemned to die might have been innocent all along. The rain had stopped by the time Detective Marcus Hale left Ravenhill, but the clouds still hung low, heavy and colorless, as though the sky itself carried judgment. He drove in silence, the wipers clicking intermittently across the windshield, his jaw clenched tight. On the passenger seat lay the sealed evidence bag, now containing the fragment of cloth Thor had unearthed. Marcus's mind spun with conflicting thoughts. Pride in years of work weighed against the gnawing guilt that perhaps he had condemned a man too quickly. Back at the precinct, Marcus moved with deliberate caution. He had spent 3 decades in law enforcement, his hair now salt and pepper, his back slightly stooped from years hunched over case files, his reputation one of thoroughness and resolve. But age also brought self-reflection. He remembered his father, a beat cop who drilled into him the mantra, "You don't serve the law if you don't serve the truth." That phrase haunted him now. He carried the cloth to the forensic division, a sterile wing that always smelled faintly of ethanol and rubber gloves. Inside, he met Dr. Elaine Whitaker, head of the forensic team. Elaine was in her late 40s, tall and angular with sharp cheekbones, blonde hair streaked with gray pulled back in a bun, and steel blue eyes that rarely blinked when she was deep in thought. Known for her blunt honesty and meticulous nature, she had built her career on uncovering the details others missed. Her white lab coat hung slightly loose on her lean frame, and her hands bore faint scars from long years of handling chemicals and equipment. "Marcus," she greeted flatly, adjusting her glasses as she saw the bag. "You look like you've been digging up ghosts." "Maybe I have," Marcus replied, his gravelly voice low. He set the evidence on the table. "I need a full DNA workup. This wasn't logged in the original case. I don't know how it was missed or hidden." Elaine studied him for a moment, then sighed, pulling on gloves. "If you're asking me to run this, you suspect more than clerical error." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Just run it. I need to know." Hours passed with the hum of machines and the faint clicking of keyboards. Marcus paced the lab, staring at white walls and cold steel counters. His heart pounded with the weight of waiting. Elaine finally emerged from the analysis room, a folder in hand. Her expression was grave. "This blood isn't Jonas Carter's," she said simply. "And it doesn't belong to Victor Montgomery either." She handed him the report. "It matches another profile, Daniel Reeves. You remember him?" Marcus frowned, memory stirring. Reeves was a contractor in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and long hours on construction sites. He had thinning dark hair, a mustache he kept neatly trimmed, and a temper known throughout the community. Reeves had been in frequent disputes with Montgomery over property, boundaries, and zoning rights. More than once he had stormed into council meetings, his booming voice demanding justice for what he called Montgomery's land theft. He was the kind of man who carried grudges like others carried wallets, always close at hand. Marcus read the report again, his throat dry. If Reeves's DNA was on evidence from the crime scene, then everything about the trial was flawed. He sank into a chair, elbows on his knees, rubbing his temples. "God help me," he muttered. "What have I done?" Meanwhile, back at Ravenhill, Jonas sat in the visitation room, with Thor still by his side. The German shepherd's amber eyes scanned the photographs Detective Hale had left behind, crime scene shots printed on glossy paper. Jonas had pushed them aside, unable to stomach them, but Thor nosed them back, his paws tapping anxiously. The dog growled low, then barked sharply at one particular image, the corner of Montgomery's penthouse, where a rug had been hastily pulled back. Maya Lopez, who sat across the table, leaned in, her dark hair falling over her shoulder. Her warm brown eyes narrowed as she studied the photo. "He's reacting to this spot. Jonas, look, there's something off." Jonas's hands trembled as he picked up the picture. The rug's pattern ended abruptly, as though something had been dragged across it. He clenched his jaw. He smells something. Something that wasn't cleaned right. A guard outside the door glanced in at the sound of barking. Officer Cole, tall and broad with sandy hair. frowned but said nothing, watching with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. He had grown to respect the way Thor moved, purposeful and alert, unlike any ordinary dog. Maya reached out, smoothing the photo with her fingers. "Jonas, if Thor's right, it means the crime scene was tampered with, more than what they showed in court." Jonas stared at her, then down at his dog. "He's always been right before. He dragged me out of fire when I wanted to stay. If he says something's wrong, it's wrong." Back in his office, Marcus lit a cigarette, though he hadn't smoked in years. The smoke curled upward as his mind raced. He remembered the trial, the prosecutor's confidence, the way Jonas had sat silent, unflinching. He remembered how quickly the jury had delivered their verdict. And now, with Reeves's name on the lab report, everything began to unravel. He picked up the phone, dialing Helena Graves at Ravenhill. The warden answered with her calm, authoritative tone. Marcus's voice was sharp but shaken. "Helena, I've got results. The blood on that cloth. It doesn't belong to Jonas. It belongs to Reeves, Daniel Reeves, the man Montgomery was fighting with over land." There was silence on the line before Helena spoke, her voice clipped. "You're telling me we might have sentenced an innocent man to die?" Marcus exhaled smoke. "Yes, and I was part of it." He hung up and leaned, back, staring at the ceiling. The shadows he had ignored, the shortcuts he had taken, now loomed larger than ever. Jonas Carter was days from death, and unless he acted, those shadows would bury the truth forever. Detective Marcus Hale had spent the better part of his career believing corruption was something that happened elsewhere, in different districts, under different hands. Yet now, as he sat hunched over a stack of property deeds and financial records in his dimly lit office, the truth gnawed at him like a slow rot. The evidence pulled him towards something larger than Daniel Reeves alone. The name Victor Montgomery appeared again and again, not just in development deals, but in council records, hush money transfers, and quiet settlements. Montgomery had been preparing to expose something ugly, and it had cost him his life. Marcus's weary eyes traced a series of notes Montgomery had scribbled in the margins of property maps, cryptic phrases like coastal haven deal, illegal permits, and Lang involved. The name Victor Lang was familiar, a prosecutor in his early 50s with an impeccable record, sharp features, a head of slick silver hair always combed into perfection, and a charisma that swayed juries. Lang carried himself with authority and style, his tailored suits and polished shoes, a testament to ambition. To the public, he was the face of law's integrity, but Marcus had seen the shadows behind his smile. Lang was ruthless in his prosecutions, willing to bury opposition under piles of circumstantial evidence. Digging deeper, Marcus found another name, Wilson Grant. In official records, Grant was listed as a consultant, but whispers in police circles described him differently. A fixer, a man who appeared when powerful people needed messes cleaned. Grant was in his late 40s, tall and lean, with slicked-back dark hair and cold gray eyes. His jawline was sharp, his demeanor smooth, but there was an air of menace in his calmness. He dressed in muted suits and spoke little, but when he did, it was always with precision, as if calculating the weight of every syllable. Rumor had it, he had once been military intelligence before vanishing into private contracts that skirted legality. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. His conscience was heavy. If Montgomery had intended to expose Lang and his allies for corrupt land deals, then Jonas Carter had been the perfect scapegoat. A veteran with PTSD, publicly seen as unstable, with just enough circumstantial evidence to make the case look airtight. Jonas hadn't killed Montgomery. He had been framed to protect men like Lang. Meanwhile, Maya Lopez had brought Thor back to her small house for the night. She sat on the worn couch, exhaustion weighing her down, watching the German shepherd pace restlessly across the living room. His black and tan coat gleamed under the lamplight, his scarred shoulder twitching each time he sniffed the air near a box of files Marcus had left with her. Thor suddenly stiffened, nose tilting upward, ears alert. He dashed toward the open window, barking sharply into the night. Maya's heart skipped. She stepped quickly to the window, but saw only the quiet street below, lined with flickering lamps. Still, Thor's hackles stood, his growl low and steady. "You sense something, don't you?" she whispered, stroking his back. She had learned long ago not to dismiss his instincts. The next morning, Marcus met Maya outside Montgomery's penthouse, a towering glass building overlooking the ocean. The crime scene had been officially closed, but Marcus, leveraging his seniority and a few favors, had secured access. Dressed in plain clothes, a brown coat pulled tight against the wind, his glasses perched low on his nose, he looked more worn than ever, but determination fueled him. Maya accompanied him, her dark hair tied back, her medical bag slung across her shoulder, insisting she would not let him go alone. Thor led the way, his paws clicking against the marble floors as they entered the penthouse. The opulence of the place was marred by faint shadows, the rug still slightly askew, the scent of cleaning solutions lingering. Thor's nose lowered to the ground, his tail stiffening as he moved toward the kitchen. He began barking sharply, pawing at a sleek chrome trash bin shoved into a corner. Marcus quickly pulled on gloves, kneeling beside the dog. Inside the bin, beneath layers of ordinary refuse, lay a small plastic bottle. He held it up, the label faded but readable. Industrial cleaning agent, commonly used to dissolve blood traces. Marcus's stomach turned. This wasn't in the original inventory, he muttered. Maya stepped closer, her dark eyes narrowing. Whoever planted the evidence against Jonas used this to cover their tracks. Thor just found what your people missed, or what someone made sure they didn't see. Marcus exhaled sharply, realization dawning. He could almost hear Lang's smooth voice, could see Grant's cold gaze. They hadn't simply built a case against Jonas. They had engineered it, erasing the truth with calculated precision. Jonas hadn't just been unlucky, he had been sacrificed. That evening, Marcus drove to a quiet bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where men in suits rarely ventured. There, he found a retired journalist named Samuel O'Connor, a man in his 60s with a thin frame, balding head, and a mustache yellowed by decades of cigarettes. Samuel's reputation had been built on exposing political scandals in the 90s, but years of threats and dwindling health had forced him into obscurity. Still, his memory was sharp. Marcus bought him a whiskey, sliding the glass across the table. "Tell me about Montgomery," he said quietly. Samuel chuckled, his voice raspy. Montgomery was dirty, but not stupid. He kept records. He was gearing up to go public. Land grabs, bribed officials, construction permits forged. Lang had his hands in it, and so did Grant. Montgomery thought he could cut a deal by outing them, but he didn't realize they'd slit his throat before letting him talk. Marcus's hand clenched around his glass. The weight of his failure pressed harder. Jonas Carter had been nothing more than a pawn in a war for money and power. Thor, at Maya's side, pressed his head against Marcus's knee under the table, amber eyes looking up, as if to remind him why this mattered. Marcus rubbed the dog's ears absent-mindedly, whispering, "I won't let them bury him. Not again." The shadows had thickened, but for the first time, Marcus could see their shape. Jonas Carter was innocent. And Victor Lang, with Wilson Grant at his side, had built a prison not just of walls, but of lies. The courthouse in downtown Oceanside had always loomed as a symbol of solemn order, its neoclassical facade of marble columns standing against the salt-laden wind from the Pacific. On this gray morning, however, it seemed less like a monument and more like a stage where shadows and truth would finally clash. Reporters huddled outside the steps, cameras poised, their breath clouding the cool air. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with restrained tension, the air heavy with anticipation. Jonas Carter sat at the defense table, his lean frame straight-backed, a quiet dignity etched across his scarred face. Dressed in a plain suit borrowed from a prison chaplain, he looked less like a criminal and more like a man carved from hardship. His gray-blue eyes held calm, though beneath the surface swirled years of torment, survival, and guilt. At his feet sat Thor, the German shepherd, his black and tan coat gleaming, his amber eyes unblinking. The dog's presence radiated steadiness, a silent sentinel anchoring Jonas in the storm. Behind them, Maya Lopez sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her long, dark hair fell in a braid across her shoulder, her nurse's poise tempered by visible anxiety. Her brown eyes glistened with hope and fear, the kind of look carried by someone who had stitched wounds on battlefields, yet knew this fight required something different: faith. At the prosecutor's table, Victor Lang adjusted his immaculate suit, his silver hair combed back so smoothly it glinted under the courtroom lights. His square jaw tightened as he shuffled papers, his polished shoes tapping the floor with controlled impatience. His charisma had swayed juries countless times, but today, beads of sweat clung near his temple. He was a man accustomed to control, now finding the leash slipping. Beside him sat Wilson Grant, the fixer, his tall frame stiff, his gray eyes evasive. Dressed in a muted charcoal suit, he exuded a cold detachment, yet there was something frayed at the edges. His slicked-back hair and sharp jawline were masks for the unease beneath. He avoided Thor's gaze, as if the dog's stare burned through every lie he had told. The presiding judge was Eleanor Winters, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a dignified bun and deep lines carved across her pale face. Known for her impartiality and stern demeanor, she had built a reputation as a judge who demanded the law be upheld without fear or favor. Her gray eyes scanned the courtroom with sharpness, and when she lifted the gavel, silence fell like a curtain. Detective Marcus Hale rose from his seat, his salt and pepper hair unkempt, glasses slipping slightly down his nose. The years weighed heavily on his stooped shoulders, but his voice carried strength. He stepped into the center of the courtroom, holding a folder thick with evidence. His gravelly tone cut through the silence. "Your Honor, members of the court," he began, "I stand here not just as a detective, but as a man burdened by guilt. Months ago, I helped condemn Jonas Carter to death. I believed the evidence. I trusted the system. But I was wrong. The truth was buried, deliberately. And today, I present the proof." He laid out the chain, the missing cloth Thor had uncovered, the DNA analysis that matched Daniel Reeves, not Jonas, the bottle of industrial cleaner Thor had detected in Montgomery's penthouse trash, the financial records showing bribes exchanged between Montgomery and Lang's allies, and finally, Samuel O'Connor's testimony about Montgomery's plan to expose the corruption. As Marcus spoke, Thor sat motionless, his gaze fixed on Wilson Grant. The room seemed to pulse with the dog's quiet authority, as if his presence alone was demanding honesty. Judge Winters' eyes sharpened. "Mr. Lang, what do you have to say to these accusations?" Lang rose, his practiced smile strained. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to cloud a straightforward case. The evidence against Carter—" But Marcus's voice cut him off. "The evidence against Carter was planted, by Grant, under your direction." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Lang's jaw flexed, his veneer cracking. He turned to Grant, who sat stiffly, his gray eyes darting. For years, Grant had been the quiet shadow, cleaning up others' sins. But under the pressure of Thor's stare, Maya's unwavering gaze, and Marcus's words, something inside him faltered. His hands shook slightly, his usual calm cracking. "I can't do this anymore," Grant muttered, voice hoarse. He stood, his tall frame towering but trembling. "It's true. I planted the jacket. I handled the evidence. Montgomery was going to expose Lang's deals, land permits, bribes, the Coastal Haven project. They made him a liability. And Carter," his voice broke as he glanced at Jonas. "Carter was the perfect scapegoat, a soldier with PTSD, already fragile in the public's eye." The room erupted, murmurs surging like a wave. Judge Winters slammed her gavel, her voice ringing. "Order! Order in this court!" Lang's face paled, his silver hair glistening with sweat. "He lies!" he snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Grant's eyes burned with years of suppressed guilt. "I've lied enough. Not anymore." Judge Winters' gaze was unforgiving as she turned to Jonas. "Mr. Carter, please rise." Jonas stood, his frame steady. Thor pressed against his leg like a comrade at arms. "This court finds that your conviction was tainted by prosecutorial misconduct and deliberate tampering of evidence. The death sentence imposed upon you is vacated. You are free." Her gavel struck. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, and then applause thundered. Reporters clapped, strangers wept. Maya covered her mouth as tears spilled freely. Jonas closed his eyes, drawing in a breath so deep it shook his body. He knelt instinctively, his hands gripping Thor's fur, whispering, "We made it, buddy!" Thor's bark rang out, sharp and triumphant, echoing higher than all the cheers. In that sound, there was no courtroom, no bars, no death sentence. There was only freedom. The morning after the trial, the air in Oceanside carried a freshness Jonas Carter had almost forgotten existed. The Pacific stretched out in endless blue, waves rolling gently toward the shore, sunlight glittering off their crests like shards of glass. For years, Jonas had awoken to walls, chains, and the suffocating silence of Ravenhill. Now, standing in the open air, the salty wind filling his lungs, he felt like a man tasting freedom for the first time. Maya Lopez stood waiting near the steps of the courthouse, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid, strands catching the sunlight. Her olive-toned skin glowed, her brown eyes wide with emotion as Jonas approached, shoulders squared but heart unsteady. She rushed forward before he could speak, wrapping her arms around him with a trembling force that almost broke him. Jonas buried his face into her hair, breathing in the faint scent of lavender, his body shaking, as if only her embrace anchored him to reality. Thor circled them, barking joyfully, his black and tan coat gleaming, his tail wagging in furious arcs. The German shepherd leapt playfully against Jonas's chest, pressing his scarred muzzle into his master's hands. Jonas knelt, holding Thor close, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath thick fur. "We made it, buddy," he whispered, tears streaking his weathered cheeks. "We finally made it." In the days that followed, the small house Maya owned in the quiet suburbs became their sanctuary. The porch creaked with familiarity, the garden alive with bougainvillea vines, and the air carried the mingled scents of ocean and earth. Jonas found himself waking still in the night, haunted by echoes of war and prison. But each time he did, Maya's soft hand brushed his cheek, and Thor pressed his weight against his chest until the tremors passed. The nightmares had not vanished, but for the first time, Jonas did not face them alone. Neighbors visited, curious but kind. Mrs. Adler, an elderly widow from next door with snow-white hair pinned neatly in a bun, brought over apple pie. She was small and stooped, her blue eyes sharp with wisdom. "Heroes don't always wear medals," she told Jonas softly, pressing the pie into his hands. "Sometimes they come back scarred, but still standing." Jonas thanked her quietly, humbled by the warmth he no longer expected from strangers. Thor became a favorite among the neighborhood children, his scarred shoulder only adding to his air of rugged heroism. He allowed little hands to tug at his ears and stroke his back, always patient, always watchful. When Jonas walked him along the beach, joggers stopped to greet the dog, their faces lighting with admiration. It was as if Thor carried not only his own dignity, but also the unspoken testimony of everything Jonas had endured. One early morning, Jonas woke before dawn. The house was still, Maya sleeping peacefully beside him, her dark hair spilling across the pillow. He rose and walked to the porch, Thor, padding at his side. The horizon was painted with hues of rose and gold, the first light stretching across the sea. Jonas leaned against the railing, his lean frame silhouetted by the glow, and for once, he felt the quiet, not as a cage, but as a gift. Maya joined him minutes later, barefoot, her nightgown brushing against her knees. She slipped her arm through his, resting her head on his shoulder. Her voice was soft, trembling, carrying both fear and hope. "Jonas," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." He turned, his gray-blue eyes searching her face. Her lips quivered before she smiled through tears. "I'm pregnant." The words struck him like a tidal wave. For a moment, Jonas stood frozen, the soldier within him trained to absorb shock in silence. Then, laughter broke through his tears, raw, unrestrained, filled with wonder he hadn't felt in years. He pulled Maya into his arms, holding her as if she were the anchor to his soul. Thor barked loudly, bounding around them in joyous circles, his paws splashing in the dewy grass. He leapt up, pressing against Jonas's chest, tail thundering against the air. Jonas laughed harder, stroking his loyal companion. "You hear that, Thor? You're going to be a big brother." Later that morning, the three walked to the beach. The sand was cool under their feet, the waves lapping gently at the shore. Jonas held Maya's hand tightly, his calloused fingers entwined with hers. Thor ran ahead, bounding into the surf, splashing through the foamy water with the exuberance of youth restored. The sunlight bathed them all in gold, the horizon vast and endless, promising new beginnings. Jonas paused, staring at Maya's hand resting over her stomach, then at Thor leaping joyfully against the waves. 5 years of darkness had nearly consumed him. Battlefield scars, wrongful conviction, the cold edge of death row. Yet now, standing here with the woman he loved and the dog who had never abandoned him, he realized those scars no longer defined him. They were reminders of survival, of loyalty, of love that had endured against all odds. The soldier, the woman, and the dog, 3 souls once fractured, now walked together toward a dawn where the light was unbroken. Sometimes what looks like the end is really the beginning of a miracle. Jonas, Maya, and Thor remind us that scars, no matter how deep, can become the very place where God's light shines through. In our daily lives, we all face battles, some in silence, some in the open. Yet in every struggle, there is hope, there is loyalty, and there is grace waiting to be discovered. Just as God restored Jonas's life, he can also turn our darkest nights into mornings filled with light. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Leave a comment. Where have you seen God's hand at work in your own life? Let's keep this place filled with faith, kindness, and encouragement. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can hear stories of hope, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless you and your family with peace, courage, and joy in the days ahead.